Hi, good morning. Welcome to another session. My name is Muthu. I'm the founder of Ibazone and startup Podium and the creator of this series of conversations. This morning's conversation, we have a very exciting conversation. It's the opportunities and challenges facing tech companies in Asia Pacific region, and it'll be moderated by my good friend from Singapore, Chris Hardesty. He is a KPMG Global Healthcare and Science Group firm. Is a member of that. He's presently based in Singapore. He's worked around many parts of the world, Europe, US, Brazil, with extensive experience in geography and project type. His passion is in private and public partnership to drive innovation, save, and so on. So I will let Chris also further add to what I have said to just make sure I didn't short sell him. Over to you, Chris. Have a great session. I'll come back to you 5 minutes before your session ends. So thank you.
Great, many thanks, Muthu, the Messi team, and to all who organized the fair this year. An incredible feat to move that to a virtual format. So well done to you and to the Startup Podium as usual. As Muthu said, my name is Chris Hardesty, so I'm the director of KPMG's Healthcare and Life Sciences practice in Singapore, working on health system design and financing across the Asia Pacific region. Today, I'll introduce the topic in a bit more detail in just a moment, but sort of for the flow, just to orientate the audience. We have three panelists here who I will introduce, and each one are going to spend just a few minutes explaining, what their focuses are, what their priorities are, that way you can understand kind of their vantage points in the world. We do have some kind of prepared topics to run through, but honestly, we would be very happy to take audience questions straight away. So as you hear from the panelists, if there's things that you want to learn about, one of them in particular, or just topics you want this group to discuss, make this session yours is what I would say. So today, the theme is the opportunities and challenges of medical technology, which of course is quite wide. One of the things that I often find in my work in this part of the world and along this theme are what I call sort of paradoxes of healthcare in the Asia Pacific. And Fredrik, who I'll introduce in just a minute, we did a kind of program together a couple of years ago on actually kind of quantifying the footprint of the medical technology industry in the Asia Pacific. So I find all these kind of paradoxes. So for example, we're going through one of the greatest healthcare investment transformations in our population's history with the implementation of universal health coverage. That's a $2 trillion investment into the Asia Pacific region, yet we're still allocating half the recommended target of our GDP toward healthcare, right? 51% of the global population lives here. This market represents 24% of medical device sales, right? And it's number 2 in the world now after Europe, so growing quite a bit, but still disproportionate to the population size. You see a lot of countries in the region that are doing their Make In or 4.0 programs to really look at boosting local economy. But in the medical technology field, still 70% of the devices are imported. And one that, personally, I quite enjoy, I think that fosters a lot of interesting outcomes, but you have great necessity, and sometimes that is the mother of innovation as well. So I think we'll dig into some of these things today. We'll talk about the trends that we see out there. You'll hear about the initiatives that the panelists are running in this space. We'll look at Southeast Asia, but also Asia Pacific more broadly, as well as maybe some global comparators, and also kind of interweave the implications of what the COVID-19 situation is having on this. And we've intentionally organized a quite diverse panel today to bring you perspectives from different aspects of the ecosystem here. So like I said, hopefully that helps you understand a little bit of what we're going to try and cover today. Please do put your questions out there. We'll take them straight away and have a bit of fun. Before I turn to the panel, I do want to gamify things a little bit. So we're going to use a tool today called Mentimeter. Hopefully you can see that on your screen. And I think in the chat box as well, you have the link and the code. So if you go to menti.com, and I hope it works, it says voting closed, we'll see. If you go to menti.com and put in the code, you should be able to vote. And I just want to get a sense from the audience on kind of how you're feeling out there, as it pertains to medical technology in the Asia Pacific. Are you optimistic given all the kind of momentum that this industry has right now? Are you still kind of waiting to see how things play out? Or are you feeling negative? Just take a minute. I'm not sure. It says voting closed, so it may not be working actually.
Chris, it's not open for voting, it says, so just maybe you want to just check.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just cam that. You know, but if people want to put in the chat or the Q&A anyway, your response to that question, then that's fine. But I think when I've been doing these sessions over the past couple of weeks, people are generally, I would say, optimistic to neutral. I don't see a lot of negativity, whether as it pertains to the medical technology or the financing. I think people do feel like there's some momentum now. So anyway. Okay, so what we'll do next is we'll shift into the panel mode. So like I said, I'm going to ask each panelist to take about 3 minutes and explain their kind of vantage point in the world and some things that they're focused on. Yes, I do see some audience comments coming in now that they are optimistic, so that's good for the panelists to know as well. And again, each panelist will have just a couple of minutes to explain, and please do put your questions in if you have you know, interesting thoughts as it pertains to what they're talking about. So I'm gonna share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see that. I have to do full screen mode. There we go. Okay, so up first we've got Ajeesh. He is the he works in the strategy group for Johnson & Johnson's Southeast Asia cluster, including key account management, working across pharmaceuticals as well as medical device and consumer health, as you can see here. So quite a vast portfolio and a very interesting region. So Ajeesh, would love to hear some opening comments from you, please.
Fantastic. Good morning, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today. Quickly introduce Johnson & Johnson. You've probably heard of some segments of J&J. So to give you an overall picture, we're in 3 specific categories. One is in the consumer products, where we look at baby care, skin care, wound care, and women's health products. We're in the pharmaceuticals business, where our focus is primarily around cardiovascular, metabolism, immunology, infectious disease, oncology, and pulmonary hypertension. And we're also in the medical device business, where we focus on surgery, orthopedics, and vision. So this is Johnson & Johnson. We're probably the broadest based healthcare company out there. And we have a strong presence in Southeast Asia and in Asia. But I think one of the most interesting things about Johnson & Johnson that people might not know about is how much we are in MedTech innovation and the kind of things that we're doing there. We have a lot of things going on across the spectrum, right from innovation centers that are really looking at basic science and looking at early stage acceleration. We have 4 innovation centers around the world. We have the J Labs, which is the most exciting part of innovation at Johnson & Johnson, where we bring in portfolio companies into our offices, into these J Labs that we provide them with a lot of space, equipment, and connections to build their companies. We have a strategic investment arm, a corporate venture arm called the JJDC Strategic Investments. And we also do a lot of M&A and late stage development with the companies. So across the board, you know, these are the 3 sectors we work in, and we are very, very keen on innovation. In Southeast Asia and in Asia in general, we, from a MedTech or medical devices perspective, we are very optimistic. We see a lot of growth happening in the region. This region is growing, it is learning, it is adapting. And so overall, you know, J&J is very optimistic and geared to growth in this region. And you know, looking for partners of all types to grow with us. Back to you, Chris.
Okay, great, thanks. And yeah, I wanted Ajeesh to be on this panel because he represents the kind of, you know, conglomerate multinational perspective as it pertains to medical technology. So I think for the audience out there, if you have questions about kind of J&J's priorities and what they focus on, or like Ajeesh said, kind of how they're looking at some of the early stage innovation, you know, kind of programs too. So I think a couple angles there that hopefully will be of interest and we'll unpack further today. So thanks a lot, Ajeesh. Okay, next I'm going to turn to Fredrik. He's the Managing Director of the MedTech Innovator program, and I won't steal his thunder by explaining that further. So Fredrik, over to you to walk us through that and some of your views.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me here. So just very briefly about myself and my background here. So 30 years in healthcare, 25 years in Asia Pacific, mostly focused on medical technology. Came out here doing regional sales, marketing, business development for a medical equipment multinational. So I've done a bit of that. I've been in strategic consulting for a number of years. I headed the regional trade association, APAC Med, that some of you may be familiar with for the last 5 years or so. And as Chris mentioned, now I lead the MedTech Innovator initiative here in Asia Pacific. I'm based in Singapore, and a few words about MedTech Innovator. So we are a non-profit. We are, in fact, the world's largest accelerator and competition specifically focused on startups in medical devices, digital health, and in vitro diagnostics. Headquartered in the US in Los Angeles, just off the UCLA campus. We're entirely industry-led, so you see some of the logos here, and Johnson & Johnson, of course, is one of our strategic partners. So we work very closely with our industry partners, and they participate throughout the program in providing coaching and mentorship to the participating founders and CEOs, as well as sit on panels where we have judging panels for pitch events and so on. I did want to just highlight on the left-hand side of this slide the URL. We are now open for applicants for a 2021 program. So if you are a startup in MedTech and are keen to be part of this, go to www.medtechinnovator.asia for details about how to apply. And I think there may be one more slide, Chris, which I'll cover very quickly. Just to give you some numbers, we are now in our 8th year of operation. There are about somewhere between 4,000 and 4,500 startups that have been through the program. They've gone on to raise more than $2 billion US in follow-on equity funding. Our alumni raised just last year $650 million. There have been 11 outright acquisitions, 60 products are on the market, and we have a total of 340 alumni companies. So that's sort of in a nutshell what MedTech Innovator is all about. In terms of the topic of this session, certainly I've always been an optimist, and being relatively familiar with the markets here, I would say that the opportunities far outweigh the challenges here. There are some significant challenges, certainly for MedTech companies entering markets in Asia Pacific, and we'll dive into this in a lot more detail in a moment. I'd argue one of them is just simply the heterogeneity of the region. Every market is different, and that poses some real challenges for companies that are entering the MedTech markets here. Opportunity-wise, obviously the sheer population size, Chris spoke about that, the demographic trends, the rising chronic diseases, overall economic growth, universal healthcare coverage rollout. There are a number of factors that I'm sure we'll come back to during the course of this discussion. So thanks, Chris. Over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Fredrik. And I think for those who are not aware of programs like MedTech Innovator, I think it's great you're able to join us today, because it's one thing I really enjoy about the Asia Pacific is despite all the heterogeneity and the complexities, I think it's great that such structure exists for innovation to be seen and scale up. So again, I hope for the audience out there, if you have questions about programs like these and how they scale up, as well as Fredrik's experience with kind of trade groups and policy shaping too, then let's please ask those. Thanks, Fredrik. Okay, last but not least, we have Mark. He's a partner at Pureland Venture Capital, and again, he's got a couple pages here, so I won't steal his thunder by explaining that any further. Mark, over to you for your comments, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Really good morning to everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here with Chris, Ajeesh, and Fredrik. And I can vouch for what Fredrik said about MedTech Innovator. We actually had two portfolio companies. One made to the finalist, and one participated. Both benefited quite a bit from the last MedTech Innovator cohort. So a bit about Pureland. We are early stage MedTech focused VC based out of Singapore. And we invest in medical device, digital healthcare, AI, anything that we feel successful can inject value into patient caring system, save lives, reduce demand supply gaps. It's an impact funds. So our fund's mission is to bring healthcare saving and access to 100 million people globally in the next 5 years. And Chris, next slide, please. And in the past 2 years, we, through all our investment and the technologies, we have impacted more than 10 million lives in counting. We invest globally, excluding mainland China, but we do cover countries from US to Europe to India, a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. And currently we have more than 15 investments through different medical technologies, primarily in medical device, from radiotherapy treatments to ophthalmology to early stage lung cancer screening through breath, to pregnancy is a big one because of UN SDG, to brain health, asthma, COPD caring, etc. So next slide. We are an active fund. So post investment, we spend quite a bit of time working with our portfolio companies on growth. So pretty much we do things from manufacturing to hospital introductions to market expansion, tax, governance, helping them to restructuring the scientific advisory board, etc. Given the challenge of medical device, right? Especially the earlier stage. Normally they take a bit more time during the R&D to grow, to hit commercial. So which is why I think the investors' help is quite important. A little bit about myself. So I'm from an M&A background, started my career in PwC Canada in public audit. And then from there went to private client services. And then went to M&A. Following the deals, I went to US, spent a bit of time in New York, Baltimore, DC, serving the large private equities. And then during the transition period, spent a little bit of time officially in KKR in Asia. And then also spent a bit of time in a Chinese government-backed buyout funds, so on the tech space. So has always been my career passion. And then during the time, I realized private equity is not the only way to do investments. Actually, if you do investment into the right companies, you can actually deliver more value to people. So that's why when the opportunity came, I joined the Singapore family offices and helped them to structure and spin off VC. And that's how Pureland started. So with regarding to the topic, I think as everyone said, Southeast Asia is definitely a big opportunity. A lot of investors from funds to billionaires, angel investors are quite excited about APAC, especially India, Singapore, Vietnam, etc. So it won't take too much time from the discussion, but I think post-COVID, the shift in healthcare trends is to digitalization on the investment thesis for future care, healthcare, which is on-demand patient care, backed by AI, machine learning, driven decision-making supporting systems, and blockchain-backed EHR to run on dedicated medical device to deliver a really good patient experience. Yeah, happy to discuss more in the panel.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And I think this rounds things out nicely, right? Because we've got the kind of corporate investor there. We've got yourself, kind of institutional investing, and then Fredrik, you know, as the kind of facilitation body therein. So I think it's great. We've got these various views, given you know, this is the start at Podium, and we're talking about opportunities and challenges here for the region. So thanks, everyone. And again, to the audience, please do put your questions in. We'll take them here for the group. So for now, no questions, so I'm going to go to the script. The theme, of course, opportunity and challenges, right? But let's kind of come maybe a layer deeper than that and make this a little bit tangible for people. So my first question to you guys will be, if you had to pick one threat and one opportunity you see for this industry, it could be Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, or innovations coming out of this region for other parts of the world, but one threat, one major threat and one major opportunity, And at least in the way my mind works and how kind of I see things out there, that doesn't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive either. I mean, I love this idea of necessity is the mother of innovation. So it could well be that your threat is indeed the opportunity too. So I let each of you take that as you will. I'm going to go in the same order as we introduce the panelists, just because Ajeesh has been sitting there for a while now. So Ajeesh, one major threat you see and one major opportunity from kind of the J&J lens.
Right. From the J&J lens, looking at the MedTech space, the medical device space in Southeast Asia and just in Asia in general, I think the greatest opportunity is the potential in Asia, right? The amount of unmet demand in Asia. There is so much demand and there's a growing demand. And from a J&J perspective, our opportunity is how can we get as much surgeons and nurses trained and ready to provide these services in this region. So that we find that an amazing opportunity. We spend a lot of time in professional education, both of surgeons and also nurses, because that's a team that actually does provide care. And so that's the greatest opportunity we see. We find it very exciting. We're looking at many different ways of how we can really partner with the surgeons. So I mean, it could be professional education in the regular sense of the way, but also now with COVID, thinking of digital and seeing how we can really engage with our surgeons and nurses, and how we can provide those courses. I think that it is the most exciting opportunity for us, because that will actually shift the needle. The more people we have who can provide care, the more care we can provide in Asia. So, which is one of the biggest challenges. That and infrastructure is some of the biggest challenges in the emerging parts of Asia in terms of providing care. From a threat point of view, it's with COVID and all the budgets being cut down, and all of the governments looking at money, that is going to be a bit of an issue. Saying, if people are going to start cutting down budgets and people are going to draw down, budgets that was set for other parts of healthcare, all going into the pandemic fight, and we're going to have challenges. And affordability was already an issue in the region, and so with this, that's going to be a little bit of a threat, and we need to be very creative on how we deal with that threat, right? It could be how, maybe not depend on the government for the next couple of years. See, there are other private parties that can come in terms of loans, in terms of other ways that we can support the affordability aspect for our patients to tide over the next 3-4 years till everything gets back to normal. So yeah, that's an opportunity and a threat we see.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I see the intertwine between those 2 points. And I had, for my kind of closing remarks, I was also going to touch on this concept of creativity. So well done. I think that's exactly, because when you talk to governments, for example, they already spend billions and trillions in this field, right? So in some sense, it's a little bit of a reckoning of how are we more creative, how we make better use of the resources we have, right? Especially in these times. So yeah, thanks. Those are great. I do see some audience questions coming in now, so I'm going to cycle through everyone on this question because I think it's a great one, and then we'll jump right into the audience questions too. So, Fredrik, greatest opportunity, greatest threat you see out there?
If I start with maybe the greatest threat, and this probably varies over time, but I think a challenge for a lot of medtech startups here in the region are the regulatory complexities. There is still the regulatory environment is becoming more predictable as countries implement that haven't previously had regulatory policies in place. But there is very limited harmonization, although there are some attempts to harmonize, but it's still the differences are vast between markets. But also, if we stay with some of the government policies and some of the potential threats of government policy, the other big one, of course, is what governments are doing in the area of pricing. With the example of volume-based pricing that we're now seeing in China, price caps in India. You've had systems in place for some time, like foreign-based reference pricing in Japan. Those are all challenges that a medtech, smaller medtech company getting into Asia Pacific are going to have to grapple with very quickly, and some of them are going to put significant pressure on margins. So that's maybe one or a couple. In terms of the one opportunity, and there are many, but I think maybe one is the level of digital acceleration that we see, the very rapid adoption of digital platforms in countries that are still developing, the way that many markets are leapfrogging from old-fashioned telephones to everyone having a smartphone, and therefore being able to use that platform to all of a sudden plan for hospital visits, or plan to see their clinicians, remote monitoring, telehealth, teleconsultation, all those sorts of things, and how rapidly that can actually scale in some of the less developed parts of this region as well. I think that's certainly something that excites me.
Yeah, thanks. And I love both of those points, because to me, this is just another classic example of the paradox of this industry, right?
Exactly.
Because right now, you have so much interest in healthcare, all these tangential industries are trying to pivot in, and they have digital offerings, and they come in and they realize how highly regulated this industry is. And many times for the right intentions, right? I mean, yes, of course, there needs to be greater harmonization, but there's a lot of intention behind why it's so highly regulated. And sometimes I think that can be a bit of a wake-up call for those that have not had so much experience in healthcare before, Okay, great. Mark, yeah, one threat, one opportunity from your vantage point.
Yeah, sure. I actually agree with what Ajeesh and Fredrik said. I think my job is easier now because I just need to summarize. So I think the biggest opportunity this part of the world or globally is still the digitalization and development of tech. The issue in Asia is still the healthcare gap, right? And the lack of trained physicians and also nurses. And we believe, given the speed of aging population and everything now with COVID, a lot of the gaps can only be bridged by tech. So for example, when you look at India, right, it has 80 million, 75 aiming to be 80 million diabetics. And then when you get diabetes, like an example, like a side disease, diabetes retinopathy, so there's a 25-30% chance you go blind. And then you need ophthalmology to really see the case to assess. And a diabetes doctor cannot really tell if the patient has an eye problem. So for 80 million diabetics, there's only 20,000 ophthalmology trained in the whole country, which is the same number of ophthalmologists in the US. So when you look at kind of urban patients to doctor distribution is about like 20,000 to 1. But then if you bring it to the rural side of India, the same problem is like 200,000 to 1, right? So like these kind of things can only be gapped by tech. So for example, we've seen a company that use fundoscope and AI, do offline-based AI to really do screening on diabetes retinopathy. And then they've been deployed in many different diabetes clinics. So now the nurse can use a camera, do an offline scan, and then less than 10 seconds, the patients will know they have DR or they don't have DR. And if they have the eye disease, then they get referred to see ophthalmology. It's a much more efficient way of using the doctor's time as well. So then back earlier this year, we've seen how fast technology grow, right? So using China as example, the Ping An Doctor, so which is one of the largest healthcare platform in China, grow 10 times once COVID hit in the new user registrations. And then the same trend is happening in other countries from US, India, Australia, Singapore, etc. So like what people sometimes don't realize is hospitals are in trouble too. So when the government require a national lockdown, a lot of the hospitals' cash flow are actually down significant because they have to turn away the non-COVID related patients. So given the hospitals are relatively thin margin business, so they also finally realize some of the system needs to change. And then when you have a thing like COVID, it's the only thing that can push through changes this fast from a culture, organization charts, and also like hospital governance perspective. So the like what we have seen in the healthcare system in the past year probably got pushed forward in the thinking by like 10 to 20 years. And then this also becomes a threat, right? Because as Ajeesh mentioned, it's everyone is looking at the pockets now and reevaluating on the budget. So during the peak of the COVID, we heard news that some of the Indonesia hospitals are actually in the liquidation or trying to find a buyer. So when the hospitals are desperate, the innovation is put aside because everyone we talk to from Europe to US to Australia are trying to focus on solving COVID. So like the regular clinical trials for non-COVID patients and the like some of the innovations on some other side of things are delayed and pushed back. So these kind of the things are causing trouble for medical device companies, and they have to manage on how to survive it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And you touched on funding, which is perfect because that's our first audience question we're about to take here. I did want to say I love your diabetic retinopathy example, though, because oftentimes what I see with the kind of startups is, they're banking on just having a good technology, right? And eventually technology will become obsolete or someone else will invent the better mousetrap. And, of course, everyone says, what problem are you trying to solve? I would take that a step further in healthcare. And it's like, actually, what service gap are you helping to improve, right? And so are you, obviously you could save the system cost that way or improve the quality, but I think it has to be so clear how the technology is actually solving a healthcare gap in service, right? And so if you don't kind of have that pairing, I think, that's where we don't see scalability and sustainability. So I think that was a great example that you gave. Okay, the audience questions are flowing in now. So as I promised, let's take those directly to kind of throw out our playbook here. The first one is about funding. And bearing in mind that, this is the startup Podium, so our target audience here are those kind of, mid to small players that are trying to grow. I will let each panelist kind of take this how they want, but my suggestion would be, we've already touched on kind of government budgets and fiscal funding, right? So maybe we could pivot the conversation a little bit into, is there capital flowing around for innovation in this space? Where is it going to come from? So J&J side, are you guys investing? Are you keeping your wallet tight? Or are you actually looking to kind of invest in this space? I think for Fredrik and Mark too, is funding being deployed? Where can people find it? So again, if you want to talk about public sector funding, that's fine too, but I think we touched on that topic a little bit already. So Ajeesh, let me come to you on this one.
Right. I mean, from a funding perspective, luckily, J&J is a large company and we are very broad-based. So it does not affect our flow of funding at the moment, right? So we will continue to invest we'll continue, our preference would be to continue to invest in companies that are aligned with the treatment areas that we are most focused on. For example, if it's anything to do with lung cancer, pulmonary hypertension, there are areas that J&J has products, as solutions and stuff. So if there is a startup that is coming up with, for example, a diagnostic for the treatment we have, then we would be very more inclined. And there is absolutely no pause in the amount of funding and interest that we have because of COVID. Fortunately, I think J&J and all of the large companies will not see any dip in funding as long as it is in line with our interests. So we still are actively working with accelerators to find good companies that we can bring into JJ Labs. I think for this team here, I think JJ Labs would be the place to go and see how we can see if that's something that they want to get in on, how they can get in on that. I think that's the way to go. But there is no change.
Great. No, this again a very optimistic answer, and I'll put your phone number in the chat for everyone. No, I'm just kidding. they can all ring you up. I think sometimes this industry gets a bit of a bad rap, on pricing and stuff. But I mean, as we see during COVID, all these investments into the research, it's just championing us through the situation, and that's why you need an industry around healthcare, right? It cannot just be about lowest cost denominator, because then you just stifle innovation, right? So I think it's very inspiring that J&J powers through and helps us get out of the COVID situation in various ways, and that you have something like J Labs that can continue to build the future generation too. So I think that's great for people to hear out there. Fredrik, how about you from MedTech Innovator? Where's the capital flowing? What are you seeing?
It's a great question, and in spite of the pandemic, we're seeing, and I think maybe Mark is probably the better person to comment on this in terms of VC investments here in the region in MedTech, but but we're certainly seeing some very significant success stories. We typically monitor the startups that go through the MedTech Innovator program in terms of how they do their fundraise and the milestones that they hit. Our winner for 2019, NDR Medical, Singapore-based robotics company in lung biopsies, raised $8 million just 3-4 months ago. In the midst of the pandemic. Our winner this year, liquid biopsy company Excel, they closed an oversubscribed round of $4 million, again, just a couple of months ago, which goes to show that even in the midst of a pandemic, there is money for the right opportunities. So certainly there are, and we see similar examples from the US as well. We did, interestingly, a webinar. We did a MedTech Innovator panel a couple of months back, specifically on investment and the VC environment in Asia Pacific, and we asked our panelists, who were primarily VCs, whether they would invest in follow-on funding. Is fine, and I think Mark can speak to this, I'm sure, but whether, and maybe this is a question for Mark as well, would a VC be prepared to invest in a completely new opportunity where they may only have met the founder and the CEO over Zoom during these times of COVID-19? The question the answer that we got was some bit of hesitance, but generally no, they wouldn't. They'd keep their money aside for follow-on funding for their existing portfolio companies, but that they would be very reluctant to invest in a company where they haven't had that face-to-face interaction with the founders. So that was an interesting data point, I thought, and perhaps relevant to this discussion as well. So I welcome Mark's views on this, of course.
Yeah, and I'm gonna pivot this question slightly from Mark, because another kind of related audience question come in. So hang on, Mark, and I'll come to you. But I was just gonna say kudos to MedTech Innovator as well for keeping things going, because it could be easy to just kind of retrench, right? And we can't get together in person anymore, and can't travel and stuff, but you guys managed to also pivot to kind of a virtualized format and do all the pitching and competitions and everything, right? Which is just an incredible way to keep things going and keep the innovation happening. So
thanks. And of course, we give away cash money as well, so that's another way of getting some funding.
I'll put your phone number in the chat too.
By all means.
Yeah, I think maybe Marco, it'd be nice to hear from you, because obviously you are a deployer of the capital here that we're talking about, right? So what are kind of, what things are you focused on? What should the community out there be aware of? What investors like yourself are kind of seeing as being hot? And there's a kind of related question here from the audience, and they're kind of asking, if I'm a startup, what areas should I be thinking to play in? So maybe we can pivot this slightly into, what are some of your priorities,
Yeah, sure. I'll quickly talk about the last topics since Fredrik asked. So, and we're definitely deploying, right? I think from a VC perspective, we were impacted. Everyone was impacted back in March, partially because of the uncertainty of COVID, and also partially because of the equity market meltdown, right? Because valuation plays a key role in investment decisions. So most of the uncertainties was on the markets and how the market is going to grow. So from US perspective, I saw some pauses, definitely, and we from our perspective is an opportunity, because it's a valuation repricing, right? So a lot of times on the opportunities you like but couldn't do because of the some people call it bubble, but different people view it differently. Now you can negotiate a better price or perspective with the founders, and we done for investment this year. Actually, just rolled $1 million check 2 weeks ago. So been a lot of news. One of our US company just got a signed MOU with Mail last night. So, but then also my mentor told me VC is a regretting game. So you either invest in the wrong company, or you didn't put enough money in the right company, or you missed the right companies. So I think all three hit me already. So far in the past 2-3 years. So we're hoping we're making the right decisions, right? And from what Fredrik was saying, it is really challenging to do investments over Zoom because like we are a 30% problem, 70% people funds. Like during the initial evaluation, which I'll get a bit more into the details on the things we're looking for. We spend most of the time focused on if this is really solving the right problems, right? Is it the right solutions, and is the doctors really buying to it, and is the key opinion leaders really supporting it? But then once we get that over with, the rest of the time is really spending with the people. And when you're over Zoom calls, it's quite tough, like, because you can't really meet the team effectively. You probably spend most of the time with the CEOs. And then everyone knows during the investor pitch, everyone shows the best side of themselves. So it's harder to get to know the person and to see how they solve problems, etc. So from our perspective, a big chunk of this year deployment is on existing companies, because we did quite a bit already, and a lot of them are on following up rounds, right? And then when COVID hit, they have cash flow problems. So from a VC's perspective, if they cannot really raise new funds, then we have to support from an existing investor perspective. So like for example, earlier this year, we wrote a bridge loan for a Singapore company called Biorhythm, because they're currently discussing rounds with some larger groups, and it takes some time to close. So and then from a startup perspective, once you have a cash flow stops, then you delay the speed and milestones, right? Which makes it harder to negotiate investments. So which is why we gave a bridge loan, try to help them to survive the period and stuff. And in terms of sectors, I think oncology, like Ajeesh said, oncology is still quite big besides COVID related things. Like there's a study showing like 1 out of 5 people, finger crossed, will get cancer in their lives in the like as a growing trends. And from Asia perspective, I think you start to see the investment moving from an earlier stage to a growth stage, because a lot of the very good companies are moving forward. So like 2 years ago, I see a lot of very interesting startups in Singapore, for example, and now I see more and more growth Series B or Series A opportunities in the region. And then, but I think from a funds perspective, we definitely need more healthcare focused funds in Asia, or especially Southeast Asia. A lot of the funds do have a healthcare pillar, but then it's mainly targeted towards digital healthcare. When you look at device, right, it's naturally more risky. So I think having more funding and more VCs to grow the ecosystem will be good. And then from our perspective, like it's quite exciting because we were able to get valuations that we were never able to negotiate it before. And then in terms of the, I guess, sector focus, China has always been leading in the investment size in terms of unicorns in healthcare in the past, I would say 2-3 years. And then you see a big chunk of the funding covered in India, but then because of COVID, I think India funding stopped significantly, and our portfolio companies are impacted as well, right? During the national lockdown, like the ophthalmology company I was mentioning, called Remedial, like they're serving 1,500 clinics right now in the country. And then once it's locked down, all the revenue from India stopped, because the doctors, from a culture perspective, they buy device on a face-to-face basis, right? They're not really used to Zoom meetings. And when you sign up a Zoom meeting with doctors, when they get busy, they don't really attend. And it's really hard to build that kind of trust, etc. So luckily they expanded into US, and then the US revenue grow because of COVID. So that kind of helped a little bit, but across the region, we've seen a lot of the medical device deal got paused. And then
And maybe I want to make sure we get to the next question there, because actually what you were just talking about is kind of related to the audience question. So sorry to interject here. Essence of time.
I guess I'll talk about what we're looking for in the next questions and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. One thing you said that I found quite interesting, and I hope resonate, or that people kind of understand out there. You said it quickly, but I want to re-emphasize it, which is, it's called the Cinderella effect in healthcare. Before COVID, everything was about chronic disease, right? All the rhetoric, and part of it are the campaigns that are run, right? So there's a bit of a strategy there, right? And then of course now we've perhaps swung a little bit too far the other way in pendulums, and now everything is focused on infectious disease. But I think what Mark said is very interesting, which is, he's keeping this portfolio quite balanced. So for those of you out there in spaces that are hurting a little bit right now as a result of focus on COVID-19, I think you have to keep innovating and keep powering in some of these disease areas, because investors are continuing to look, right? So I think that's important. We're going to take one more audience question here, and then I want to wrap up with a question for you guys too. So I would ask everyone, maybe just kind of keep your answers a bit tight, if you don't mind, so we can come back, and I want to have some closing remarks with you guys too. So the audience question here, and Mark was just touching on it toward the end, is about kind of telehealth. I won't put you guys on the spot necessarily about cybersecurity. You're welcome to touch on that if you want, but I don't think any of you are necessarily experts in that space. But I think what would be interesting, because it's such a big topic now, right? Everyone talks about it. How are each of you looking at the telehealth situation? Are you going in? Are you forming partnerships? Are you seeing a lot of like legitimate kind of business models emerging? Or for you, it's a bit of a hype factor, and you're not sure if it can actually stick around? So again, try to keep your answers a bit tight if you can, so we can cycle through this. But yeah, Ajeesh, I'd be curious to know, J&J, what's your stance on telehealth? How are you guys partnering or looking at this?
Right. I think when it comes to using digital technology and engaging with our patients from a device provider, there are two angles where we're looking at this, right? So the first is how to engage patients and educate patients about surgery, about a procedure, about an intervention. So this could be a surgery, this could be a pharmaceutical intervention, but in order to engage patients and make them aware and prepare for this treatment pathway. And so that's something that we're looking at from a digital point of view. How can we use digital to do that from J&J perspective? The other perspective that we're looking at is how can we enhance the treatment pathway with digital? So what do I mean by that? So this could be, for example, if you get knee surgery and you have a joint replacement. We're working with a company now to see how good a person's gait, how they're walking, and how they used to walk before and after, and see if the surgery was successful, see if we needed to do anything, see how we can improve the complete recovery of the patient after the surgery. So that's for us from a J&J point of view. We don't do telehealth per se or digital health, but we try to look at digital health and say, we provide an intervention either through a surgical device or through a pharmaceutical product. How can we augment with this? And so it could be before the intervention. So it could be awareness and getting the patient ready for the intervention, and also following through on this intervention, making sure that they're taking the medicine or the surgery is working out well and they're getting the right thing. And so that's how J&J looks at telehealth services, to say, how can we use digital telehealth services to support interventions, which is the primary focus of Johnson & Johnson, as in the device or in the pharma field.
Yeah, great. And if I had to kind of translate what you said, I think probably to the audience out there, I mean, this is the raison d'etre of things like JLabs, right? I mean, you're open to these types of partnerships and solutions that can come and figure out. Of course, you have to find the synergies and kind of suss it out, but that's the purpose, right, of these kinds of platforms, is for you to engage with these innovators out there. So, right. Fredrik, and again, let's just try to be a bit quick here. I want to come back to each of you before we wrap up. But yeah, what are you seeing in the MedTech Innovator program? Is it sticky? Obviously, there's a lot of hype, but how sticky is it, do you think?
You're referring to telehealth and telemonitoring
yes, sorry, yeah,
situations?
Yeah,
so just looking at the our 2020 cohort of 20 MedTech startups from across the region that were part of the accelerator, I'd say probably more than half had some element of remote monitoring, telehealth component, or something that allowed them to provide either teleconsultation, telemonitoring, or something along those lines. In fact, as one example, one of the companies that were in our finals provided in a B2C consumer business model a wireless stethoscope, if you like, on steroids, that allowed consumers to use it on children, on their family members, and it hooks up to an app, and it's everything is remotely monitored. So it's not just a primary care situation, but it's very much home care as well. We're seeing much more of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point for people out there to realize as well as, pre-COVID, I think we were just using terms very loosely because they weren't so adopted. But, nowadays, I think it's kind of table stakes that these solutions are digitized. So probably we need to get a bit cleaner in our messaging too, in terms of, is it telecare, is it telehealth, is it telemedicine, is it remote monitoring? So as you said, the whole portfolio is in some way kind of built on these concepts now, right? So probably we can be a bit more targeted in our communications going forward too.
Right.
Mark, how about you? Just kind of quickly, are you looking at this space as well? Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll just describe an experience we wish to see in the future, right? Like what we're really hoping for is on-demand healthcare, right? I used to be told by my family doctors to eat more fruits and vegetables every time I visit back in Canada. So and now through COVID, you start to see changes. So we're hoping to see like when patients get sick, they can use an app to schedule appointments and to receive guidance. They can pick the physician based on their location's preference, time, and experience, and the price. They can chat with it or AI assistant to discuss symptoms, and then schedule appointments on the phone based on the doctor visits. And then they can do a telehealth call with the doctors to discuss it. And then if there's a lab testing needed, then it can be ordered on the same app and then scheduled delivered to the patient's home. And once it's done, like they can chat with the physician on the same app to receive the treatment plans. And then they receive the drugs delivered to the home. And then the physician will follow up after the treatments and get access to the history through EHR or cashless claims. And then they receive health analysis and risk of the patients and to see what kind of specialist and to see what's next steps. And then patient satisfactory at the end, right? So I think globally that is a trend we're trying to evolve in. Everyone is getting busier, and now like every other sector is moving into these directions, and healthcare as well. So.
Yeah, great, thanks. I mean, that's reinforcing that you're also looking quite closely at this and going back to the earlier points about improving some service gaps too. And we didn't necessarily touch on the security aspect. I didn't want to put you guys on the spot. I mean, I would just say, yes, obviously there are security risks, especially as the adoption is scaling up, and we even see the hacks in the news, even related to COVID-19 vaccine and stuff too. But I think a lot of people are working very hard to put in the right rules and protocols. And if anything, COVID-19, I think a lot of us have seen the benefit of kind of more open data sharing in a way, right? So I don't foresee the security aspect really kind of delaying per se telehealth. There are some other things that need to be sorted out, like reimbursements and stuff too, but that's a conversation for another day. Okay, I have, and we are almost out of time, so you guys will have to give a very rapid answer, but I want to ask you guys kind of fun question here, because the audience are primarily sort of startups. So what is one pitch you saw recently, and what is one thing you particularly liked that they did that others could probably learn from in this time, right? Where we're virtual pitching, there's a lot of focus on healthcare. So just one pitch you saw recently, and what was the one thing that they did really well that others should do more of, okay? Let me start with Mark, since I think Mark and Fredrik, it's a little bit more your day-to-day. So Ajeesh, you have some time to think about it.
Yeah, I'll try to be short because I can talk 3 days nonstop with this. So like, first of all, don't tell me competitor is dead when they're not, because during due diligence, we do meet them. And this actually happened to us before. If there's one thing I want the startups to take away from my talks today is executions, right? Execution really has no excuse. It's not something we saw in the pitch. It's something we evaluate through the entire DD process, right? And execution is not a job of CEO or C-level executives. It's down to every single employee in your company. And it's a culture that needs to be grilled into your DNA of the company, because there are just too many challenges in MedTech companies compared with FinTech and other things. So if everyone is relying on the CEO to do the job, you'll never be done on time. Yeah.
Great. And so that obviously has to come out in the pitch too, right? You have to get the sense of execution and a real plan, right? I think is what you're saying too, right?
Yeah, and don't overly exaggerate, right? Investors have 6 months to do due diligence, and everything you said from the first talk, they will some sort of remembering, and then they will use it against you, or and if you over exaggerate too much, you lost your credibility. That's something that's most important for founders.
You mean 100 billion market size potential isn't enough for you? I'm just kidding. Fredrik, how about you? You see a lot of pitches. What's one thing you think that people do well that others could learn from?
I think one thing that that's important and that I've seen done very well, the team is critical, right? Every investor is looking at the quality of the team, and during these days of COVID-19, everyone's doing pitch presentations over Zoom. Try to get a good quality microphone and do the pitch in a work environment. So our winning company this year, they were actually in their R&D lab with people moving around them, behind them, and they could call them in during the pitch and wave and say hello, so that you can see that there is a real business there, as opposed to having just a CEO hunched over a computer screen and like the way we are now. So I think engage with your team and make sure that the audio works.
Still can wear shorts, I guess, as long as you're sitting down.
That's absolutely fine.
Okay, so okay, yeah, very interesting. No, that's great feedback. Maybe some things people can think about. Ajeesh, I'm sure you're pitched to, or obviously J&J are pitched at. So yeah, would love.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to differentiate between the technology and the solution. And so if you're going to, and so I think that's very important. If you're technology is good, but if it can't translate into a solution or a workable solution, it's not going to fly. And so what I always look for is, it's a great technology, but what is the solution that you're trying to provide? How does it fit in within the ecosystem, with the price point, with what is the need in the society right now? So I always try to look at solution versus technology, and I try to differentiate how I look at that.
Yeah, well said. In fact, I was going to make the point that neither Mark nor Fredrik even talked about technology, right? I mean, their pitch best practices were more about, just how the team and the plan, and as you said, what kind of problem is being solved here. So, for those that just purely focus on their technology, that's probably not the winning strategy. Okay, we are out of time, so many thanks to the audience for putting your questions in. I hope we addressed those. Thanks to my fellow panelists for being so engaging and so open and sharing. I think as we tried to do the polling earlier on, didn't exactly work, but from the audience chat, there is a bit of optimism here. A lot of, businesses that were not in healthcare before are all looking at healthcare. There's a lot of capital flowing, as you heard from the panel here. I talked earlier about the paradoxes of healthcare, which are definitely there, and you heard those today, but one of the ways to get out of that, as you heard Ajeesh use the word as well, is just creativity, right? So we heard today about digital engagement, about ways to close the service gaps in healthcare. And one thing, I don't know if everyone picked up on at the very beginning when we were doing introductions, but it's just about working together, honestly. And everyone on the panel today, work from very different vantage points in the ecosystem, but everyone is already working here together today in some way, right? So I think this is a form of creativity to break some of these paradoxes. So anyway, there are opportunities and there are threats, as always, but I hope people feel a sense of optimism. Many thanks again to the panelists and to the host, and let me turn it back over to Muthu to close things out. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. Brilliant conversation, and as always, it's nice to see you doing the panel, very calm and still keeping time in control. Fantastic. Fredrik, thank you. Mark, thank you. And Ajeesh, thank you. So it was great having you guys. I think it was great learning for me, and I think one of the takeaways is I think collaboration is the way to go forward, and I hear India a lot, so maybe that's where it's going after COVID. So thank you so much for being on the panel this morning. We have another exciting panel at 3 o'clock on how pandemic has changed the use of blockchain, AI, and cloud. We have speakers coming in from the US and India and also Singapore and Germany and France later in the afternoon. So hope to see as many of you then. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you all after the pandemic in person. It's nothing like having coffee or beer together. So see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.